Okay. Yes, please, Manuel, go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patrick, for the invitation. Thanks everyone for joining on a Friday afternoon. I know in Europe. I'm in Montreal, so here it's the morning, so it's not as late here. Well, thanks for the invitation. So maybe before starting, um, I would like to give a little bit of context. So I'm a professor at the University of Montreal in the mathematics department. I've been doing applied statistical learning in finance and insurance for the past 20 years at the University of Montreal, doing a lot of collaborative research with industry. Um, that accelerated in the past 7 years because, as you may know, Montreal became an AI hub, artificial intelligence hub, because of many of the work of my colleagues here at the University of Montreal, working on artificial neural networks, deep learning. And then all of a sudden, 7 years ago, it exploded, and a lot of interest focused on Montreal, investment from Google, Facebook, Microsoft of the world. They opened up labs. The community grew exponentially here. And that created also a very robust ecosystem where researchers started collaborating even closer with the industry. In my case, that was working with the banking industry. I joined the National Bank of Canada as the chief artificial intelligence scientist. I was with them for over 3 years. Now, National Bank of Canada, it's not the central bank. It's a private bank. It's just that it's called national. And through that experience, I got to work on different applications of artificial intelligence, and I understand that's the key interest of this community. So that's me. I joined the university again after this experience, and from the university, I've been piloting different projects that try to use methods and techniques from what we call artificial intelligence to unlock value at different levels and in different applications. And today, all of them focus on finance. And today I want to talk about one recent project that it's just beginning, but that it's one of my favorites, and is AI applications in responsible finance. So I want to talk to you about that one. But before that, I want to give you some context on the group that I belong to here in the University of Montreal, and out of which we're doing this project. This project is also in collaboration with different actors in the industry, in the ecosystem in Montreal. One of them is Actionable, which is a French-based company that does consulting on responsible finance. But we also work with pension funds here in Montreal, in Quebec. In particular, one thing that it's interesting here is that the pension system here, it's public, and so there are two big pension funds that managed all of the pensions here in the province. So that's over $500 billion under management, and they have two missions. One of the missions, of course, is making sure that the pensions are well managed and that the money is going to be there for the retirees. But another mission is to create through those investments value for the society and the province of Quebec. So under that second mission, that's where we find our collaboration interesting, because we are working with them to identify ways in which AI can help them gain visibility on their investments and how do you call it, and the impact of those investments for the society. So that's a little bit of the context. Maybe I want to talk. Well, I'll come back to that. Okay. So I'm sure that you have heard about ESG investing, responsible investing, sustainable investing. So the ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, which refers to those central factors that are used to measure the sustainability and the social impact of investments of a company or a business, right? So this comes from the understanding or the recognition that the current state of affairs, the current level of activity, level and type of activity of our societies is not sustainable, right? In the longer term, our economies and our societies are consuming resources at a pace that it cannot be sustained, and there has to be a transition towards another way of doing the same thing, right? And this has to be aligned with those 17 sustainable development goals that the UN laid down 7 years ago. And this transition applies to all the levels of activity, all the sectors of activity of our societies, and of course also in finance and investing, because investing and finance, it's one key component of that cycle of our economies, right? The investing is how that money gets channeled to those places where value is created. So there's something now called ESG investing, which is a field of activity where, with the objective of trying to identify or measure how companies, how projects are faring in terms of transitioning towards this more sustainable world, in combining traditional techniques with this new ESG lens to identify better places for investment to flow, okay? And that means many things. That means integrating this ESG lens into the decision-making process as it exists today, but it also means how do you transform, how do you extract all that information that gives you a view of ESG transitioning of the companies. How do you transform that data, how that information into new measures or metrics that you can use in your decision-making process. And this comes about because now investing is, yes, it's no longer just seeking positive returns, but it's also seeking long-term impact on society and environment. And this is gaining momentum. There are now different standards that are being created now to measure these 17 sustainable development goals and transforming into metrics. Now, to be a little bit more specific, these 17 goals here are very vague, and that's how they were created to be. But if you want to go more granular and to give you an idea, what are we talking about? So I talked about ESG, right? So environmental, social, governance. Those are the pillars, but then they get broken down into more granular and concrete objects. So, and there are many, many frameworks, right? So this is just like maybe a basic framework. I will go back to the frameworks later, but just to give you an idea. For instance, environmental, well, of course, there's it breaks down into themes like climate change, natural resources, pollution and waste. The social pillar, well, that can be broken down into human capital, product liability, right? How are companies being how are companies managing their liabilities towards the consumers? Social opportunities, right? How are companies creating opportunities for the society as a whole, not only to benefit themselves, but also making the society benefit from the activity of the company. And governance, it's how a company is governing itself, right? How is it behaving internally towards their employees and so on. And then each one of these themes can be broken down in even more granular subjects or topics, right? Climate change, then of course we're talking about carbon emissions, carbon footprint, the impact on environment, pollution and waste. How are they managing their waste, their emissions, their packaging material, In terms of social, well, labor management, how they're managing their employees, the health and safety component of their activities. In terms of social opportunities, are they creating not only more jobs but also fair jobs and jobs that are creating value for the society? Governance, equity in pay, equity in gender. How are they behaving in terms of ethics, right? What are their practices in the way they operate? So this is very granular, right? So this is what we're talking about. And so an ESG investor, what he's trying to do is trying to go through all of these very at the very granular level themes and trying to understand how a given company is taking actions towards aligning itself with these ESG key issues, right? And that, as you may already guess, that's a very challenging, task. And the main reason for that is because the data that it's required to conduct this analysis is not standardized yet. There are no standards, and most of it is public. And then, of course, it's just everywhere. There are a few initiatives that are picking up and that are trying to give some framework, some structure to all of these themes that I listed here, right? So, for instance, the Task Force on Climate-Related Finance, TCFD, it's an initiative that is trying to give this framework for companies to report and disclose their activities in a way that the public can understand the impact of that company along all of these key issues, right? And that information now can be found in reports, which are not compulsory. Companies are not obliged to disclose many of these things, but these are only recommendations. And of course, companies now have the pressure to disclose this type of information. But it's a pressure coming from regulators, the society as a whole, but it's not yet regulated. So that makes for a very heterogeneous landscape, right? Different reports, different sources. And then, of course, there are the media reports, the news, social media, different frameworks. For instance, this one here, Sustainability Accounting Standard Board, SASB, they have a framework, which is something similar like this, where they break down the ESG into very concrete things that we want to gain visibility on. For instance, I don't know, we want to know exactly what it's the level of carbon emissions of that company per activity, and so on. So those are frameworks. So this is the landscape. So it's a very heterogeneous landscape, and the data is there. And the job of an ESG investor is trying to find out what a company is doing in terms of all of these elements, and based on that, recommend or make investing decisions on, right? Because now the goal, take the example of a pension fund. Of course, one of the first goals is to create revenue, right? To make sure that the pensions can be paid. But it also, the goal is to make sure that that money is put somewhere that creates value somewhere else, so in a different way as well, right? That it's not in the same predatory way that has been the way that the economy has been running for decades. It has to be now in a way that it's aligned with sustainable goals. And so that's the job of the ESG investor, and that's a very manual, time-consuming process, as you may imagine. And that's where we're trying to position ourselves. Of course, we're not the only ones, and actually the Bloombergs and the Thomson Reuters of the world, they have been doing this for the past maybe 5 years, leveraging their databases, artificial intelligence, to create metrics, right? Metrics that would measure how a given company is faring in all of these places, and that comes with a metric. So I don't know. Then you could find through the Bloomberg platform a metric for Microsoft in terms of ESG, and it can be broken down even more granular sometimes. But then again, it's very it's proprietary, so we do not know how they compute those metrics, how robust they are, and even there are a few papers recently where they compare many of these metrics against each other, and of course they are not always in the same directions. There's a lot of discrepancies between those metrics. So there's room for improvement there.
One question.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some bias in some of the metrics? I mean, we don't know, right? But that's more the assumption, basically. If we don't know what's behind, we have the assumption or the suspicion that there's some bias, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. There might be bias. There are a few papers that point towards that direction, that those are biased sometimes.
Okay.
So one of the things that we are trying to do here with our group is develop a framework to extract relevant ESG information, not only extract it, but also evaluate it in terms of quality, how good that information is. Because one thing to know is that these reports, they are out there, companies publish them, but sometimes it's just a report that does not contain very substantial information. And that's called greenwashing, in the sense that it's just publishing it and then saying we did our job, but then in fact, there's not much information there. So how do you quantify the quality of the report?
I ask you a question, Manuel, about
sure.
the metrics and the frameworks. I think, from my view, that's probably one of the, if not the most, the key challenge behind all of these responsible finance is the fact that there is no standard in terms of metrics and there are multiple frameworks, as you mentioned. So I was just wondering, that you are involved in this on a daily basis, do you foresee in a medium, maybe long term, I don't know, some kind of regularization in that perspective, and therefore, we will have some kind of more, standards, metrics there than other.
I think that's where things are going. Probably in the next 5 years, we'll be seeing standards. Maybe in the environment component first, because that's been a problem for decades now. But yes, we're moving towards
do you
that.
think that pushing those standards from the financial industry, in the financial services industry, the regulators primarily, or
regulators and regulators and then the asset owners themselves, they are pushing for this. And so we're talking about maybe 5 years, but in the meantime, there's a need to gain this visibility now, and that's where the problem is that companies and asset managers have to make those decisions now, but there's no standards yet. Probably in 5 years there will be. But
cross fingers.
So that's the landscape today, and so that's one of the things we're doing. And another interesting place for where we're trying to play a role is, so one thing is the data and the reports. The other part is that those reports, they are based on original sources, right? And so at best, those reports are published every quarter, right? And even then, when the report was crafted, they were using data probably from a few weeks before, right? So the report that you get, it's a snapshot that it's outdated at the best. So there's a need to continuously monitor. And that means going back to the original source and looking at what's happening on the ground. And from there, creating metrics that are more responsive, that are near real-time portrait of what's going on, which is better than the report. Because like I said, if it's every quarter, you have a report, but then many things happen in between, right? Take, for instance, the example of a company that is operating factories near water sources somewhere in the world. Of course, you want to know what's happening there in terms of how they are managing their waste, how they are consuming the water locally, and that happens every week, or that gets updated every week. But you don't see that in the reports, right? So you want to base your investing decisions on those near real-time actions or events that are happening, and that you cannot see it right now. But there are original sources that could be used to gain that visibility. And so that's another place for artificial intelligence to play a role, right? Going to the original sources, that could be satellite images, different metrics that are taken on the ground by companies. Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
No, I think problem solved. Okay.
Yeah. We could hear somebody speaking French in the background.
Yeah, it's my son. It's because we came back from traveling, and
okay.
they're at home. And we go back to here. Okay.
I'm very happy to go back home.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, so that's the other challenge, and that's a place where artificial intelligence can play a role, right? Going back to originally to the source and extract that information and make it actionable information. Mm-hmm. And that also means creating models to relate or to understand the interaction between the financial reports, right, and the non-financial data, because they are related, and there's no clear understanding now how that's happening. Let's take an example. If a company issues a report that says we are managing or we're investing to improve our water waste facilities, right? So one thing is to say it, but then if a company is saying that they are improving the water waste facilities, that means that there has to be planning. There has to be financial planning for that. There has to be money that is put aside, invested aside, and that leaves a footprint, right? So if I go into the public financial quarter reports of the company, that should be visible. That should be somewhere. So relating those informations, those two pieces of information, and assessing how they are related, that's also another key place where artificial intelligence can play a role. How do we combine all of these things, the reports, the original near real-time data, the models that link the two, to come up with a comprehensive visibility on how a company is faring. Mm-hmm. And once you have that, then you can base your investing decisions based on that, because now the idea is to create revenue and profit, but also create not at the expense of the environment or social impact. Another interesting place is, once you have that, how do you incorporate those considerations into the actual portfolio construction process? So we're talking about now identifying ESG factors, right? So like factors like factor investing, because these are long-term drivers or are becoming long-term drivers. So how do you measure that, and how do you integrate that into your optimization methods in your standard or traditional investment component? So we're working on this space, and there are just a lot of things, so many things to do. We are
just one comment. There was a comment from Michael saying that the EU have released the first implementing technical standards, right, for the for ESG.
True. Yeah, it's true. I saw it happening. Yeah.
Just to mention
that's true. That's true. And so things are evolving very fast, and then of course we are more on the science part. So that's why we are partnering with pension funds and companies that have been in this space for many years, and we're trying to work together, and we are building this prototype of solution The idea is to automate that process of going from collecting the data, extracting the right information. When we're talking about data, it's mostly text, right? So coming up with a language model to understand the specifics of the ESG world, and come up with information, right? So we're building this prototype. And this is like the different places or the different points in that prototype where artificial intelligence can play a role. Well, the first place would be what we call the downloader, because like I said, all of this is public, and it's there, it's accessible. It's just that it's just a lot of information out there, and you need to collect it and to parse through it and to find those documents that are relevant for the analysis, and then create a database. To our knowledge, there's no comprehensive database where you can go and search for a particular report that talks about some of these frameworks, or that aligns itself with these frameworks. So information retrieval plays a role here. We're building a first downloader to collect, and we've been collecting some of the SEC reports that are relevant to the ESG world. So that's the first step. Second step, of course, it's all of this information. It's text, but not only text, it's also graphs, it's also tables. And as you may know, that's still a challenge in terms of extracting that information out of tables and out of graphs. Then there's a part of cleaning that text. An interesting part is the language model itself, right? You may be familiar with, for instance, BERT, the Google BERT language model, and there are many models, but those are trained on very specific corpuses, data, and now we're talking about ESG specific topics. So there's a place there to work on, and then once you have that, then come up with metrics or methods that transform that information into actionable data, right? So this is what we're trying to do. For now, it's very experimental. We're taking off-the-shelf tools and exploring what could be done. Now, and one thing that I forgot. Now, here the idea is that, and if anybody in the community knows about other groups doing the same, the idea here is how can we democratize these tools, right? Because like I said, there's Bloomberg, there's Thomson Reuters. They have different proprietary metrics and tools to do similar things, but then not every asset management firm is equal. They have different goals, and they pension funds as well. The idea here is to create tools that are public and that anybody can use to do the same analysis, right? To come up with the same conclusions. So that's a little bit the goal here. It's democratize this technology, that it's available. It's just that it's, to my knowledge, there's no one-stop shop where you can go and get these tools to do the ESG analysis today. Maybe I will just conclude with a few examples of what we've been trying to do. So, for instance, if you take information retrieval as an application, as a method, and apply it here. So, if we try this with BERT, FinBERT, which is a language model that was trained on financial specific corpus, and then you can do things like this, right? You could use keywords and identify sentences in your database that are relevant to that keyword and extract that sentence, right? So we did that. Here's an example. We did that for the 3 pillars, so environmental, societal, and governance. And then what's going to happen is that if you just do a keyword search, in this case GHG emissions, then it's going to extract those sentences out of your database that are relevant to those keywords, right? Like in these examples here. So we did that for, and then again, this is a first experiment that we did. So we just took an off-the-shelf model, but just to illustrate, we're currently working on improving the model, right? Because it has to be ESG specific. This is just to give you an idea. And so we could, given a few keywords that are relevant for the environment pillar, then you can extract sentences. Oh, and then I didn't mention, but with our first version of the downloader, we downloaded a couple of thousand reports, SEC reports from companies in North America, and that gives us like our database, and that's what we're working with. And we extract sentences for now, which are sentences that are relevant or that talk about the environmental pillar, like in this case. And we did the same for the social pillar, sentences that bring information about how the company is dealing with the societal impact of their activities, and the same for the governance, right? And so this is very off the shelf, but this is something that I just put together yesterday to give you an idea of what could be possible, right? So given for companies, we can identify just like that, how many sentences in those reports talk about environmental, social, and governance. Now, probably there's not really a lot of valuable information here, since it's just off the shelf, applied to the data that we had. Like you see, it seems like there are less sentences talking about environment, whereas they're more about governance and social. We haven't even yet looked into the accuracy of these results, right? We're just experimenting, but this is just to give you an idea, and this is at the level of the pillars, right? So we have 3 pillars, and we're doing this with a model that it's not specific. So that just to illustrate what we're trying to do now. So what we're trying to do is improve the model, but also apply it to the granular level, right? So if I could go back to my framework, I would like to do the same, but for each one of those elements at the very right? So I would like to do that for water waste. Where are the places in those reports where they talk about water waste, right?
But one question will be still, okay, you have, because you still, okay, you can do information retrieval, right? But then the next step would be to be able to make decision, right, based on that. So saying that we have enough environmental consciousness in a report, or not enough, right? And how will you decide that there's enough, not enough, or the ranking, and that seems to be the challenge, right? Because
exactly. So this is just an application that what it gives you is at least you can identify those sentences that are relevant. But then there has to be layers, so that will be one layer, right? But then, like you said, right, the next step would be, okay, so now what's the quality of that information? Is it relevant? Is it really talking about an action? Right. So that's the other component. For instance, a very straightforward application of sentiment analysis tools would be assess a level or a degree of positiveness or negativeness of an action, or an action that is described in a sentence. And there are models for that, but those models are trained to identify sentiment
in terms of trading or in terms of
finance, but in terms of trading, and these are examples, for instance, like the first sentence, it says the shares jumped to 76 euros in opening and were trading at 75 euros. So that's positive, right? But it's positive in the trading finance sense.
Yeah.
What we want to identify now is have a model that identify positiveness in terms of ESG.
Yeah.
Like, is what it's saying, is it good for the environment or not? But again, if we take off the shelf for now, and we could do similar analysis, right? Given the sentences that we identify, we use off the shelf sentiment analysis to see if it's positive or negative, right, or neutral, and that gives you a portrait of what's going on. Again, the validity of this, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. This is just applying it off the shelf, but it's just to give an idea of the type of analysis that could be done. Because imagine doing this, but now not only at the pillar level, but at the granular level, right? So that's a goal, and with a model that it has been trained on ESG specific language.
And also, you might also need some labeled data sets from somebody saying this is a good report, bad report. Or do you think you can?
Exactly.
You think you can do everything like automated, or you will need a human in the loop at some point?
Exactly, and that's the other important part of the project is labeling, right? And that's where collaboration with ESG and analysts is important, because they've been reading these reports, they've been helping companies creating these reports. So how do you know that a report, it's a good report, right? What are the metrics? So labeling sentences, labeling sections, labeling reports, that would allow us to come up with better metrics. And so automating that labeling, it's also another place where artificial intelligence can play a role.
Yeah.
Right. And also ESG quality control, because yes, you want to label those statements, right? Is it a good report or not? But also the quality of a report. Like I said, you might have a report of 30 pages, but then it might only be 1 page worth of information, because it might be a lot of repetitive information or things that are not really informative. So then again, that's where summarization, methods like summarization, where you want to identify the importance of sentences within the report, right? So there are a lot of things there as well. That's another thing we're doing. We're working with ESG analysts and labeling sentences from those reports, and that will enable a deeper analysis later. But that in itself, it's a contribution as well. How do you create labeled data sets of ESG reports? And one other thing that we've been working on, and that's because that's relevant under the TCFD framework, is the distinction or identification of physical risk and transitional risk. So in climate risk. So physical risk has been around for many years, which is if a company has particular assets somewhere, those assets are at risk because of climate is changing, right? So we're talking about flooding, storms, drought. Activities of companies are at risk, physical risk, because of climate, because the climate is more unpredictable now than it was before. So in reports, you want to identify those places where the company is disclosing their initiatives to mitigate those risks, right? But then there's also now transition risk, which is given that all of the activity now is transitioning towards a more sustainable activity, that also has its own risks. right? Because that changing the way a company works, that's not easy. Take for instance an insurance company that has in its portfolio companies that have to move away from oil towards more sustainable ways of getting energy. That has potential economic impact. Like the company might suffer in its revenue because it's trying to transition toward different ways, and that of course that's going to impact the capacity to create revenue, right? So how a given company is dealing with that transition risk, that as well has to be identified, and that seems to be a concern of the ESG world now. And yeah, so you have to train models to identify within ESG reports physical risk, transition risk, and evaluate the information in those sentences. So that's what we've been doing. I would like just to take 5 minutes to talk about the context where that's happening, and end my talk with an invitation, if I may.
Yeah,
so
sure.
So yeah, so the group I work with, it's called FinML, so Fin for Finance, ML for Machine Learning, and it's a program that is composed of 6 universities here in Montreal and in Canada, actually, funded by the National Research Council of Montreal, of Canada, and an institute, IVADA, which was created through private and public funding. And what we do is we train students to give them the tools for machine learning to do better what they do in finance. And we do that through collaborative research, right? So it's not only training, but it's training through collaborative research. So we have 50 plus partners in the province of Quebec in the financial sector. With them, we create projects, and under those projects, our students get plugged in as interns, and our researchers get also plugged in as consultants or researchers to advance the different projects that we have. To give you an idea, we have projects mostly in the financial markets, traditional portfolio optimization, electricity trading, digital assets, alternative data. You mentioned banking as well, but also on sustainable investments. And many of the activities that we do are specific for our students, but we're organizing one specific activity that I would like to invite you to. Let me show you.
Yeah, what I will do, if you give me also the link later on, I can send it through the community channel. That's no problem.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, our training program is based on projects, right? And how do we get our projects from? Every year we organize this industrial problem solving workshop where we have companies. This year we have these companies here. They come here, they present a problem. We have 50, 60 students that sign up for the workshop. They get assigned to teams that work during a week on one of the problems. And the idea is that at the end of the week, we have identified some solutions and have a roadmap for the company to work on this. Actually, the AI responsible project came out of one of these workshops, and it became now a project that it's funded and that it's recruiting a team. So this year, it's at the end of August. Given the current situation, the sanitary situation with the pandemic, it's going to be online. So that makes it easy for anybody anywhere in the world to just sign up and participate in this challenge. So if that's of interest to anybody in the community,
Yeah.
I will share the information.
Yeah.
And that's it. So probably I will just stop there. If there are any questions or comments, I'll be happy to.
Yeah. Okay. So you can ask questions in the chat or Q&A. All right. There was. I think we asked a number of questions during the chat already, right? My question would be. Okay, let me see if there are other questions. Oh, sorry, there are lots of questions.
Yeah, I'm reading now.
I was not having the right tab open, so can you see them? Yeah, yeah.
I can see that there are a few.
Mm.
I will just go through them by order. So, well, I see the initiative is likely to require a lot of human and computational resources. Are you guys expecting or even pursuing support from a big digital company? Yeah, we actually were working with a couple of startups that are working on this space, and they are constructing solutions that would help automate this. So yes, we remain a university project, but leveraging some of the ecosystem. So yeah, are we able to? Yeah, are we able to tag the names of the companies during the download phase? That's part of the challenge. So yes, parse the information, but then also as you extract and create your database, you want to tag it and make it searchable. So that's one of the challenges.
In fact, I had a question regarding that, right? Because even selecting sources can be source of bias, right? So how? Because then you need to have the right sources if you want to be unbiased, right? So it's a bit of a
yeah. Again, and that maybe it's open for debate. We're following some of the frameworks, right? So we know the frameworks. Each framework has its own list of reports.
Okay.
Yeah. So we target reports because we know that those reports are likely to have the information that it's aligned with the framework that we're looking for. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I don't know. We do not know what would be the best way of approaching that.
No, of course not. It's a theoretical question. I don't have the answer either. But yeah. Next question. Is it not dangerous?
Yeah. But I think I didn't see it on time, so I don't know what he's referring to. There's no dangers to remove outliers. Yeah. Well, I don't know what it's referring to.
I remember you had outliers somewhere in your list, but I can't remember which context. But okay.
Yeah. Well, I think those are the questions that I can answer. Yeah. Unless I think it's Michael, unless you can post it again with a context, because I don't know where was I in my presentation when you asked the question. But anyway,
there are a couple of other questions. Shares jump to 76 euros versus shares jump to 75 euros, but later fall back to 40 euros, right? That's all, of course, that's...
Yeah, and then again, that's with a model that was trained on financial data, so it's measuring positive and negative in a different way, which is different than what we want to see in ESG, right? So that's part of the challenge, training a model that identifies how good or bad a certain action is in terms of ESG.
Yeah, that was my point a little bit, because you cannot just fully have this trained in unsupervised mode, right? You will need a kind of labeled data set at some point. Somebody saying this is positive, this is negative, right? It will I can't imagine right now that we have enough automated intelligence to figure out if a report is good or not, right? Anyway, so you need some kind of labeling, I guess, right? So,
yeah, because you need to identify intention as well, because in a report you can say, identify a problem or say that you are planning to do something, which is different than actually have done something.
Yes.
Right? You can say, yes, we have a problem. We're working towards improving our waterways treatment facilities. Whereas another thing would be, we did this, we invested so many dollars in this and that and that.
Yeah.
So there's a quality component to it.
But we can imagine that we would detect these action items and rank them or weight them a bit more than other sentences or keywords or patterns, for example, right? But okay, I guess that's
yeah. And that's just half of it, because then once you have that, then you want to cross-reference that with actual data, right? So if in a statement you see that the company says we invested so many dollars in improving our waterways facilities, then you want to correlate that with the actual financial statements and see if the footprint of that investment is somewhere, and it actually corroborates what the report says. Okay. And that gives you a more valid metric of the company.
But looking at it and listening to you it looks like a huge project, right? And quite ambitious project, right? By the way, right? But
it's a huge challenge, and we're just taking a very small cross section of the ESG world and try to see if we can actually create some visibility with these tools. And
anyway, Manuel, we just spent 1 hour together. That's cool. Very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. And I know you've prepared last minute a little bit because you had to travel, so no worries.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. But thank you so much to have joined us for this Friday afternoon and the last session of the community events of 2021. We will come back in September after summer vacation. Hopefully, hopefully you can get some vacation. And,
yeah.
If not,
we'll see.
Wish you a good weekend. Or thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.